Hi, Grandma here, and I'm reading Tom Sawyer. Today I'm going to read two chapters. Chapter 19, called Tom Tells the Truth, and Chapter 20, Becky in a Dilemma. Chapter 19, Tom Tells the Truth. Tom arrived at home in a dreary mood, and the first thing his aunt said to him showed him that he had brought his sorrows to an unpromising market. "Tom, I have a notion to skin you alive." "Auntie, what have I done?" "Well, you've done enough. Here I go over to Serenity Harper like an old softy, expecting I'm going to make her believe all that rubbish about your dream, when lo and behold, she found out from Joe that you was over here and heard all the talk we had that night, Tom. I don't know what is to become of a boy that'll act like that. It makes me feel so bad to think you could let me go to Serenity Harper and make such a fool of myself. Never say a word." This was a new aspect of the thing. His smartness of the morning had seemed to Tom a good joke before, and very ingenious. It merely looked mean and shabby now. He hung his head and could not think of anything to say for a moment. Then he said, "Auntie, I wish I hadn't, but I didn't think." "Oh, child, you never think. You never think of anything but your own selfishness. You could think to come all the way over here from Jackson's Island in the night to laugh at our troubles, and you could think to fool me with a lie about a dream, but you couldn't even think to pity us and save us from sorrow." "Auntie, I know now it was mean, but I didn't mean to be mean. I didn't, honest. And besides, I didn't come over here to laugh at you that night." "Well, what did you come for then?" "It was to tell you not to be uneasy about us because we hadn't got drowned." Tom, I would be the thankfulest soul in the world if I could believe you ever had as good a thought as that. But you know you never did, and I know it, Tom." Indeed I did, Auntie. I wish I may never stir if I didn't." "Oh, Tom, don't lie. Don't do it. It only makes things 100 times worse." "It ain't a lie, Annie. It's the truth. I wanted to keep you from grieving, and that was all that made me come." "I'd give the whole world to believe that. It would cover up a powerful of the sins, Tom. But I'd most be glad you'd run off and acted so bad. But it ain't reasonable, because why didn't you tell me, child?" "Well, you see, Auntie, when you got to talking about the funeral, I just got full of the idea of our coming and hiding in the church, and I couldn't somehow bear to spoil it. So I put the bark back in my pocket and kept mum." "What bark?" "The bark I had wrote on to tell you we'd gone pirating. I wish now you'd waked up when I kissed you. I do, honest." The hard lines in his aunt's face relaxed, and a sudden tenderness dawned in her eyes. "Did you kiss me, Tom?" "Why, yes, I did." "Are you sure you did, Tom?" "Why, yes, I did, Auntie, certain sure." "What did you kiss me for, Tom?" "Because I loved you, and you laid there moaning, and I was so sorry." The words sounded like truth. The old lady could not hide a tremor in her voice when she said, "Kiss me again, Tom, and be off with you to school now, and don't bother me any more." The moment he was gone, she ran to the closet, got out the ruin of a jacket which Tom had gone pirating in. Then she stopped with it in her hand and said to herself, "No, I don't dare. Poor boy, I reckon he's lied about it, but it's a blessed, blessed lie. There's such comfort coming from it. I hope I know the Lord will forgive him, because it was such good-heartedness in him to tell it. But I don't want to find out it's a lie. I won't look." She put the jacket away, stood by, musing a minute. Twice she put out her hand to take the garment again, and twice she refrained. Once more she ventured, and this time she fortified herself with the thought, "It's a good lie. It's a good lie. I won't let it grieve me." So she sought the jacket pocket. A moment later, she was reading Tom's piece of bark through flowing tears and saying, "I could forgive the boy now if he committed 1,000,000 sins." Well, don't tell Tom that. Chapter 20, Becky in a Dilemma. There was something about Aunt Polly's manner when she kissed Tom that swept away his low spirits and made him lighthearted and happy again. He started to school and had the luck of coming upon Becky Thatcher at the head of Meadow Lane. His mood always determined his manner. Without a moment's hesitation, he ran to her and said, "I acted mighty mean today, Becky, and I'm so sorry. I won't ever do that again as long as I ever live. Please make up, won't you?" The girl stopped, looked at him scornfully in the face. "I'll thank you to keep yourself to yourself, Mr. Thomas Sawyer. I'll never speak to you again." She tossed her head and passed on. Tom was so stunned that he had not even the presence of mind to say, "Who cares, Miss Smarty?" until the right time to say it had gone by. So he said nothing. But he was in a fine rage, nevertheless. He moped into the schoolyard, wishing she were a boy, and imagining how he would trounce her if she were. He presently encountered her and delivered a stinging remark as he passed. She hurled one in return, and the angry breach was complete. It seemed to Becky in her hot resentment that she could hardly wait for school to take in. She was so impatient to see Tom flogged for the injured spelling book. If she had had any lingering notion of exposing Alfred Temple, Tom's offensive fling had driven it entirely away. Poor girl, she did not know how fast she was nearing trouble herself. The master, Mr. Dobbins, had reached middle age with an unsatisfied ambition. The darling of his desire was to be a doctor, but poverty had decreed that he should be nothing higher than a village schoolmaster. Every day he took a mysterious book out of his desk and absorbed himself in it at times when no classes were reciting. He kept that book under lock and key. There was not an urchin in school but was perishing to have a glimpse at it, but the chance never came. Every boy and girl had a theory about the nature of that book, but no two theories were alike, and there was no way of getting at the facts in the case. Now, as Becky was passing by the desk, which stood near the door, she noticed the key was in the lock. It was a precious moment. She glanced around, found herself alone, and the next instant she had the book in her hands. The title page, Professor Somebody's Anatomy, carried no information to her mind, so she began to turn the leaves. She came at once upon a handsomely engraved and colored frontispiece, a human figure, stark naked. At that moment, a shadow fell on the page, and Tom Sawyer stepped in at the door and caught a glimpse of the picture. Becky snatched at the book to close it and had the hard luck to tear the picture plate half down the middle. She thrust the volume into the desk, turned the key, and burst out crying with shame and vexation. And I have a picture here for you. Okay. "Tom Sawyer, you are just as mean as you can be to sneak up on a person and look at what they're looking at." "How could I know you was looking at something?" "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Tom Sawyer. You know you're going to tell on me, and oh, what shall I do? What shall I do? I'll be whipped. I never was whipped at school." Then she stamped her little foot and said, "Be so mean if you want to. I know something that's going to happen. You just wait and you'll see. Hateful, hateful, hateful." And she flung out of the house with a new explosion of crying. Tom stood still, rather flustered by this onslaught. Presently he said to himself, "What a curious kind of a fool a girl is. Never been licked in school. Shucks, what's a licking? That's just like a girl. They're so thin-skinned and chicken-hearted. Well, of course, I ain't gonna tell old Dobbins on this little fool because there's other ways of getting even on her that ain't so mean. But what of it? Old Dobbins will ask who it was tore his book. Nobody'll answer. Without any telling, girls' faces always tell on them. They ain't got any backbone. She'll get licked. Well, it's kind of a tight place for Becky Thatcher because there ain't any way out of it. Tom conned the thing a moment longer and then added, all right, though, she'd like to see me in such a fix. Let her sweat it out. Tom joined the mob of skylarking scholars outside. In a few moments, the master arrived and school took in. That's like beginning. Tom did not feel a strong interest in his studies. Every time he stole a glance at the girls' side of the room, Becky's face troubled him. Considering all things, he did not want to pity her, yet it was all he could do to help it. He could get up no exultation that was really worth the name. Presently, the spelling book discovery was made, and Tom's mind was entirely full of his own matters for a while after that. Becky roused up from her lethargy of distress and showed good interest in the proceedings. She did not expect that Tom could get out of his trouble by denying that he spilled the ink on the book himself, and she was right. The denial only seemed to make things worse for Tom. Becky supposed she would be glad of it, and she tried to believe she was glad of it, but she found she was not certain. When the worst came to the worst, she had an impulse to go up and tell on Alfred Temple. But she made an effort and forced herself to keep still because, said she to herself, he'll tell about me tearing the pictures. I wouldn't say a word, not to save his life. Tom took his whipping and went back to the seat, not at all broken-hearted, for he thought it was possible that he had unknowingly upset the ink on the spelling book himself in some skylarking bout. He had denied it for form's sake and because it was custom, and had stuck it to the denial from principle. A whole hour drifted by. The master sat nodding in his throne. The air was drowsy with the hum of study. By and by, Mr. Dobbins straightened himself up, yawned, then unlocked his desk and reached for his book, but seemed undecided whether to take it out or leave it. Most of the pupils glanced up languidly, but there were two among them that watched his movement with intense eyes. Mr. Dobbins figured his book absently for a while, then took it out and settled himself to a chair to read. Tom shot a glance at Becky. He had seen a hunted, helpless rabbit look as she did, with a gun leveled at his head. Instantly, he forgot his quarrel with her. Quick, something must be done in a flash, too, but the very imminence of the emergency paralyzed his invention. Good, he had an inspiration. He would run and snatch the book, spring through the door, and fly. But his resolution shook for one little instant, and the chance was lost. The master opened the volume. If Tom only had the wasted opportunity back again. Too late. There was no help for Becky now, he saw. The next moment, the master faced the school, every eye sunk under his gaze. There was that in it which smote even the innocent with fear. There was a silence while one might count to 10. The master was gathering his wrath. Then he spoke. Who tore this book? There was not a sound. One could have heard a pin drop. The stillness continued. The master searched face after face for signs of guilt. Benjamin Rogers, did you tear this book? A denial. Another pause. Joseph Harper, did you? Another denial. Tom's uneasiness grew more and more intense under the slow torture of these proceedings. The master scanned the ranks of boys, considered a while, then turned to the girls. Amy Lawrence, a shake of her head. Gracie Miller, same sign. Susan Harper, did you do this? Another negative. The next girl was Becky Thatcher. Tom was trembling from head to foot with excitement and a sense of the hopelessness of the situation. Rebecca Thatcher. Tom glanced at her face. It was white with terror. Did you tear? No, look me in the face. Her hands rose in appeal. Did you tear this book? A thought shot like lightning through Tom's brain. He sprang to his feet and shouted, I done it! The school stared in perplexity at this incredible folly. Tom stood a moment to gather his dismembered faculties, and when he stepped forward to go to his punishment, the surprise, the gratitude, the adoration that shone upon him out of poor Becky's eyes seemed pay enough for 100 floggings. Inspired by the splendor of his own act, he took without as outcry the most merciless flame that even Mr. Dobbin had ever administered. He also received with indifference the added cruelty of a command to remain 2 hours after school should be dismissed, for he knew who would wait for him outside till his captivity was done, and not count the tedious time as loss either. Tom went to bed that night, planning vengeance against Alfred Temple, for with shame and repentance, Becky told him all, not forgetting her own treachery. But even the longing for vengeance had to give way soon to pleasanter musings, and he fell asleep at last, with Becky's latest words lingering dreamily in his ear. Tom, how could you be so noble? So, Tom and Becky are friendly again. I thought that was a pretty interesting 2 chapters. You probably didn't know that teachers could hit students and beat them like that, but they could. Even when I was in school, teachers had paddles that they could use, or the principal would have a paddle that he or she would use. But thank goodness those days are over. Okay, bye-bye.